Hi everyone, welcome to Tackling Tournaments Episode 2. My name's Mike, and today we're going to be talking about paint and colour schemes for tournaments. This is a question that we've had mostly from new players who attend events for the first time, but we've had it over the years and suggestions to incorporate standardised or required colour schemes for certain rules from different players across the years. Now, I'm going to start and preface this by saying we don't do that at the moment. I'm only aware of one, or maybe I suppose one company rather than one, I was going to say one location, but one company that does it, which is Games Workshop. Now, if you attend an event at Warhammer World, most of the players packs you find from Warhammer World will feature a clause that says, if your army is painted as Ultramarines, you're playing Ultramarines. If you are painting your Chaos Space Marines as Red Corsairs, they're Red Corsairs, and so on. Essentially forcing you to abide by whatever you've painted and follow those rules. Now, obviously, that's an interesting road to wander down because a lot of the time players will paint something a certain colour scheme and then not necessarily follow it. So I've seen plenty of Ultramarines armies beautifully painted. One in particular in Perth springs to mind here. And he's run it as Imperial Fists, he's run it as Dark Angels, he's run it as Ultramarines, he's run it as White Scars, and everything in between. Now, I've also, by the flip side of that, seen another Space Marine army here in Perth that's painted in quartered yellow and green, and he's run it in a similar vein as Black Templars, as White Scars, as Blood Angels, and so on. Now, the fact that one of them is painted as Ultramarines and one of them is painted as a homebrew colour scheme, in my mind, is a personal choice. What that means is that those players have elected to paint a colour scheme that they enjoy, that they want to paint, and I don't feel like that's part of an event that I want to hobby police. When I say hobby police, I mean, as a TO, you generally speaking are put in a position where you have to make decisions on the players' behalves, and then they buy tickets knowing those decisions. So what missions you're going to play, what the point limit is, what rules there are when building your army, and so on. Now, I own probably half a dozen different Eldar flyers, but I can only use 2 in a matched play event for Warhammer 40,000, and that's okay. I know that. I've chosen to collect more than 2, but if I'm going to a tournament, my expectation is 2. Now, the fact that I've chosen to paint my Eldar, I've got 4 or 5 different craft worlds of different armies at home, but of late, while I've been going to events, I've been mixing and matching them, so I've got the units that I want to play with. And I haven't been using the core craft world codex rules to begin with. I've been using homebrew rules out of the build your own craft world section. So this has led to zero confusion with my opponents. I explain it at the front end, and that's fine. And I think that as organisers, we do hobby police to some degree. A lot of them require painting these days, and if you don't require painting, there's a score penalty that's attached to it. And I don't feel like it's my place to tell someone that just because they've painted them as Ultramarines, that they can't then have a blue painted version of Cassaro Khan and then use them as White Scars. I don't see why an Ultramarines army, for all its tactical flexibility and knowledge and, centuries, millennia of training and skill, couldn't then deploy and fight like White Scars when the time came for it. And likewise, one of the biggest downsides with going homebrew is you obviously lose access to those characters that can often make armies that little bit more themed or that little bit more interesting on the table. Building your own version of Marneus Calgar in your own homebrew colour scheme, or modelling and converting something completely brand new and then having no real rules to show for it can be really disappointing. So I think that encouraging players to paint and model as much as they possibly can the way they want to is always going to be a benefit for TOs and their events. Mainly because it's more inclusive of players. It's not going to leave players feeling like they have to paint something a certain way in order to achieve a certain result on the table. And I know that painting and modelling can be very personal for people. Sometimes at a tournament you'll find people will just build and paint whatever is the best. And other times, and I think for the vast majority of players I see locally, it's not necessarily about what's the best so much as it's my army, I've spent all this time, I've built the units I want, I've painted it the way I want, and I shouldn't be penalised for doing that. And as an organiser, we obviously should be listening to our player base, and this might not apply to you, but I feel like it probably represents the majority of players, in that players who come to events want to be playing games with like-minded individuals, and as long as everyone's meeting the same standards and rules, and everyone knows up front, then no one's going to be disappointed. Now, that's not to say that the Warhammer World events disappoint people, because obviously people buy those tickets, they're incredibly rapidly selling, and people love those events, they're great. But I also think the transparency of those players packs helps that a lot. So when you buy a ticket, you know that what you're getting into. So I think that's very important, that you set the expectation for players early and often so that they understand. I had a player recently who messaged me asking if he could run his Space Wolves as White Scars, and he was very concerned that he'd painted and built them as Space Wolves, but he really wanted to run them as White Scars. And we had a conversation, and I explained that that was going to be completely fine, and he mentioned the Inheritors of the Chapter rule, which is, I think most codexes have it, which is basically saying you use this trait to gain access to one of the main faction rules. For example, in this case, he would take a Space Marine army, use Inheritors of the Chapter, select White Scars, which means he gets all the White Scars rules, but he doesn't get Kasaro Khan. He gets to use whatever colour scheme he likes. And I feel like those in the codexes actually set this expectation for new players who do come to events. It confuses their position, because they read that and they think, oh, I've chosen to paint it my own way, which means I have to use Inheritors of the Chapter, which means I can't use Kasaro Khan anymore for my White Scars. Oh, that's disappointing. I bought the model, painted it in the colour scheme, I can't use it. Oh, that's a bit crap. I actually think those parts of the codex are probably a detriment for the vast majority, if not all players, because if you're playing with just your mates at home, playing Crusade or Open, or just having a laugh, as long as everyone in the social group is aware and the social contract for everyone is met, there's no reason to go, no, because they're not blue, you can't use money as Calgar, you're not Ultramarines. I don't think any home gaming group would behave that way. And by the same token, I think that most events don't want to hobby police people to that extent, so allowing Iron Hands to be pink, green, or black, or whatever it is in between, because Space Marines are such a flexible fighting force, you can justify it that way with just about every faction. If you think about it with Eldar, my army might be painted as Biel-Tan in green and white, but I've chosen to run a mass jet bike army, and you go, well, that should be Siam Han. And you go, well, a craft world is billions of people. Surely there's when you're putting 50 models on the table, surely the Biel-Tan craft world can field an army of jet bikes and use the Siam Han rules without needing to be read. And once you actually start thinking about it, I think that position is kind of where I land on a lot of this. Just because an orc is in black and white checks doesn't mean he doesn't love buggies and bikes, and you couldn't run them as Evil Sons just because they were in goth colours. And again, it makes total sense. So I would encourage players and TOs to have that conversation up front before you buy tickets. Put it in your players packs, put it in your event, however you want to let players know. Like I say, I'm only aware of Games Workshop enforcing the play it as painted rules, and even then I think it's only Warhammer World that I've seen it officially kind of sanctioned at. Most of the stores don't necessarily enforce it for casual play, and I've not seen them do it for any of their events either. So if you're not sure, be sure to get in touch with your TO, have a conversation, explain what you want to do, and get their approval. That's ultimately the best way to resolve any confusion around colour schemes is communication. And TOs, I encourage you, like I say, put it in your players packs, make sure players are aware. You might find that there are players out there who aren't coming to events because they're worried about this, because they don't understand, because they've never experienced it before, and they're not sure how going from a home gaming group to a organised play event is going to change what their expectations are. And most of the questions we get around base sizes, around using different models and colour schemes, all stem from those new players who aren't necessarily familiar with the community expectations at events. And once you get past that, it's actually a pretty comfortable space to be in, and players will adapt very rapidly. So that's it for today's episode. Be sure to hit the likes and subscribe buttons below. Turn on notifications for us. We publish this every week. If you have a question for me for tackling tournaments, please feel free to post them in the comments below. My name's Mike, and we'll see you again soon. Thanks for listening.